Sometimes there is a fine line between bravery and stupidity, and when that line is crossed, I feel I have no choice but to root for the monster. Hello! I have 4 books I want to talk about today, and their connecting theme is that they all take place on or near the water. I really enjoy horror books that take place in nature. Horror in general is a genre that often leads our main characters feeling very helpless, and I feel like nature settings, it just really intensifies that experience because not only are you at the whim of whatever the horror elements are, but you're also at the whim of nature itself. Especially large bodies of water. It's just so common. It's a common place to go and for people to be. It can kind of lull you into a false sense of security. At the end of the day, you are very much at its whim. So I just think it's an especially fun setting for horror and thriller novels. I have 4 books I want to talk about. One of them is an anthology of short stories that I'm just gonna talk about a few of them. So the first book I want to talk about is called Sacculina by Philip Fracassi. Out of the books that I read for this video, this one was my favorite. So you have this group of men who are going on a fishing trip. You have 2 brothers, their father, and the older brother's best friend. The older brother's name is Jack, and he recently got out of prison. The whole purpose of this fishing trip is to kind of celebrate that he's out and to be reunited with his family and his friend. They do not own a boat, so they are renting a boat who comes along with all the fishing equipment. It's just meant to be a fun, lighthearted bonding experience for them. When they go out on the water, the boat's captain is with them, and he is the one who is directing where the boat's going to go to find the best fishing spots and all of that. It becomes a situation where they are trapped out on the water, and the threat just continues to escalate further and further along throughout the story. I was very impressed with how much character development the author was able to establish in a relatively short book as they're going through this survival situation out on the water. And it makes sense that it's this family coming together, so they're reflecting on their life before he went to prison. They're reflecting on the death of their mother. Not everything about these characters is spelled out for you, but because of their behavior and because of the way that they talk to each other, you really feel like you have a sense of who they are, and it really leads to you caring about what happens to them. Everything about the way that the characters are behaving, everything about what is happening around them, the confusion, it really leads to this sense of foreboding, and it's just building throughout the story. It really tears at your heartstrings because something that was supposed to be so good and pure, for this family, for these people to get shit on again. It's just like, oh my gosh. I always gravitate towards horror books that have the horror elements, but they make you feel bad about it. I don't want to not care that bad things are happening to the characters. I want to care and I want to feel bad. I want you to make me suffer. And this did. It was very much a page turner for me, and I really liked it a lot. Next up, we have Down into the Sea by Dan Franklin. This is a bit of a coming of age story. This is about a 14-year-old boy. His father committed a crime and went to prison. And since that occurred, his mother has just been extremely depressed and negligent to their home, to him, and he is feeling very isolated away from not just his mother and his father, but also the people in town because of what his father did. A lot of people are not just turning their back on him, but actively bullying him. So he lives in Massachusetts, and they're right on the edge of the water. And one day he comes across this seemingly topless woman in the water and comes to realize that she is not a normal person. So we are introduced to the basic premise of our story. 14-year-old boy stumbles across a creepy, weird mermaid. Now look, I would say that this doesn't have a ton of horror elements compared to some of these other books. It does have a darkness and a despair to it though. There's a certain melancholy to it. It's sad because I think a lot of us can relate to you're unhappy, everything is going terribly, and all you want more than anything is something to change. And if something like this were to happen to you, if you were to come across a mermaid, that would seem like the perfect vehicle, the perfect catalyst for some kind of change in your life, especially as a child who doesn't really have anyone else that he can lean on right now. I was impressed by this author's ability to make someone else in the town who you could argue is also a victim. Our author manages to make them completely unlikable, and I'm not 100% sure if they're supposed to be unlikable. There are parts of the story that make me think that maybe I'm supposed to be sympathetic towards them as well, that I should feel understanding, but I don't. Our main character for sure, but this other character, he's just a villain. I don't know if I'm just being too hard, because I'm such a softie for certain characters, but then other characters, I just don't like you. I don't like you. I would have felt bad for the circumstances that they had gone through if they weren't such a dick. But he is. Oh, the catalyst for the story and how the story wraps up. It feels very symbolic and circular. I was pleasantly surprised because, to be honest, I don't think that the concept of the cover is bad. But, for example, like if I was in Blockbuster back in the day and I saw this cover for a movie, I would think that this was a low budget film, you know? And so it's just, again, not the concept of it, but something about the execution was like, But I was really glad that I picked it up because it really enjoyed how sad it made me. So this story isn't so much about being on the water, it's more so about being called to the water, but also afraid of the water at the same time. And that inner turmoil of that intrigue and curiosity, but also that fear and trepidation. Okay, so next up we have The Cavern, and this is by Alister Hodge. Okay, so this is getting a little bit more back into a traditional horror type story. This is a combination of, not only does it take place in the water, but it also takes place in a cave, which is right up my alley. So there has been a sinkhole that has opened up a cave system in Australia. This group of cavers are very excited to be the first ones to try to map out this cave system. So we have like this big group, kind of our main characters are this couple who are a relatively new couple, Sam and Ellie. Ellie is more into the cave diving and all of that. Sam is a paramedic, but he likes Ellie, so he's getting into doing all of this with her, and she's like, oh, that'll be so valuable to have a paramedic with us as we're doing all this, right? In this cave, there is a body of water, and in that body of water, there's a monster. And that's not a spoiler because it is revealed right off the bat in the book. We as the reader know that there is a monster. These characters do not know that there is a monster. This book is not coming from just one perspective. We're kind of jumping all over the place. We're jumping around these different perspectives. There are people in the town who know about the monsters and they are trying to conceal it for reasons. And then we have the cave divers just trying to do their thing. And then in a fascinating choice, I was fascinated by this. I don't know if this is more common than I realize and it's just new to me, but I personally have never read this before. We get the monster's perspective, and the thing is the monster is not a person. It's not like when you read a book about a serial killer. The monster is more of an animal, alien type creature thing. I was rather taken aback by that. I don't think I've ever seen that before, that I've read from the perspective of the monster that wasn't humanoid. So that happened, and I wish that if he was gonna do that he would have done more with it, because the moments that we have from the monster's perspective does not give us any unique information that isn't later discovered by the people in the story. Again, we have information that our main protagonists do not have. So we find information out sooner than they do, but the information we have, it was not only accessible through the monster's perspective. So it kind of felt like a bit of a wasted opportunity, to be honest. It is kind of like a creature feature where you are just who's gonna win. Is the creature gonna get them all? Are they gonna escape? What's gonna happen? So as far as this book was rather action heavy, it is like a survival thing. Something that I personally find very interesting is caving in general. It's a very claustrophobic type of setting where you have to fit through very narrow spaces. The fear of getting stuck, the fear of when you're underwater diving that something is going to go wrong and you're going to run out of air. There is a constant sense of impending doom when you're reading this story, and you don't know if it's going to be the creature or if it's going to be just the location of where they are. By and large, your survival in those circumstances is due to your ability not to panic. It took me a little bit longer to get into this one, but as soon as we got to the point where they were fully in the cave, and especially when they got to the diving part, it took me a little bit longer before I was fully invested, but by the time I was glad I read it and I enjoyed it. Okay, so our last book is Our last book is an anthology. Screams from the Ocean Floor, a horror anthology. So we have 16 different authors. Now I'm just going to talk about 5 of the short stories. I'm going to be a little bit more vague here since they are short stories, but so you have an idea of the types of vibes that we got in this thing. I'm really starting to enjoy anthologies. I never used to be big into short stories, but recently I've really started to grow a taste for them. Short story number 1, we have And Then They Eat Your Eyes by Leah Kenny. I enjoyed this one because it's something where you can really put yourself in our main character's place. Imagine you're on a boat with a friend. So he goes to sleep. He wakes up and his friend is just not on the boat. His friend is gone. And so he's on this boat that is not his boat. He doesn't know how to drive the boat. He doesn't know where he is or how to figure out where he is in the ocean. Imagine how terrifying that would be. Sometimes those really simple premises are the ones that really get you because it's easier to put yourself in their shoes. I read another story that had kind of a similar setup, but it went off in a very different direction. And that one was called Only the Ship, and that is by Charlie Walls. So in a similar fashion, we have a man who is out on a boat. He goes to the restroom, and when he comes back, he sees someone going overboard. Like, he sees their feet as they're flipping overboard. But they're not floating in the water, they're just gone. And so he also is left isolated on this boat. So the setup, while very similar, the direction that it goes in is very different. And so I actually thought it was kind of fun to read both of these books that had such a similar prompt and to see what the different authors did with it. One of them has a little bit more of a fantasy type of leanings, and the other one is a little bit more of a sci-fi type leanings. We also have one called In X Sub, and this is by Megan Stockton, who I have read a few times before. This was about a woman who is in a submarine, and she is testing the depth limits of this new vessel that they have. This story more so leans not just into claustrophobia of being submerged in the water, but also just the horrors of all the unknown things in the water. So this story was a little bit more based in reality. I thought that was a really nice balance as I was going through these short stories to have one that has a very realistic premise to it. My favorite that I read out of this anthology was called She and the Sea by Angel Banata. So this is about a young girl from a young age discovers that not only does she really like murdering people, she particularly likes drowning them. She drowns a young boy. She sees an opportunity and she takes it. And she was enthralled with the experience, and she has been chasing that high ever since. There's not a ton of time for build-up in these stories, as they are relatively short stories. Felt slightly less fleshed out. But overall, this was definitely my favorite, and I thought it was the most unique out of the stories that I read. And the last one that I read was called Screams from the Ocean Floor, because of course that's what the anthology is called. And this is by Heather Ann Yarson. So this is about a woman who goes to her summer cottage, as one does. That is where her grandfather was last seen. They've assumed that he got swept away in the water. Her grandfather wrote about this mermaid siren thing, and spoke about it as a friendly creature, someone that he went to visit regularly or came to visit him on the shoreline regularly. Now, of course, her grandfather has gone missing, so the granddaughter, while initially intrigued and whatnot and fully committed to getting to know this creature that she believes will be friendly to her, she does become suspicious. It would be so hard to let go of something like that. Like, if you think about it, if you experienced or you witnessed something supernatural or out of the realm of what the average typical person experiences, how hard it would be to let go of that. So it made sense to me. I thought that this was very appropriate for this to be the title of the anthology. So those are all the horror books that I read that had locations in or near or on the water. Yeah, and I had a lot of fun, and I'm sure I'll probably do some more videos in the future that take place in different locations, maybe like the mountains or something next. If you're still here, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it, and maybe I'll see you the next time around. Bye. It would have been fascinating. What was that? I have no idea. Me trying to say that word was fascinating.